Hello, welcome to the Manila City Debate Open lecture series. So for the first lecture video that will be released, it's going to be about improving as a judge. We're going to be talking about what are the tips and tricks that you can utilize in order to improve along in your judge journey. But before we move on to that, something that's really important as a judge is specifically your mindset. So, what do judges necessarily do within a round? And this is quite different from how debaters usually, do stuff in debate rounds. Firstly, judges, as the name suggests, they have to assess the debate fairly and judiciously without any preconceived notions or biases. So that means that if you have a particular inclination to a certain type of argument, whether that is pragmatic or principled, this is usually the time to leave those biases at the door in order for you to judge the debate as fairly as possible, which is also why we have set metrics and standards of how to judge debates within the judge manual. Judges should also rigorously analyze material. What this means is that you should ensure that material is credited based on the quality of the argumentation or the response that is given, and not necessarily the quantity. If you're unsure about how to credit material, like we've mentioned earlier, there's already set standards or set like guidelines of how to credit material. So for example, has a certain statement or premise been proven enough? And if it has been proven, how relevant it is within the round? And if there is a standard or metric that a team has brought up personally within the debate, how well have they proven their own standard or their own metric? Try to avoid as well crediting material over another simply because there are more mechanisms or there are more arguments or there are more responses given. You have to address or credit or analyze the material based on how well built that actual material necessarily is. What that also means is that when you have credited that material, you should weigh those contributions holistically rather than in isolation. So, judging and debates usually mean that there are teams competing against one another. So, you have to compare a team's material against another team's material to determine who wins rather than comparing or judging the debate based on the value of the contribution in isolation without comparing a lot of the material to what another team is saying in a round.
Yeah, I definitely agree with everything that Bianca's mentioned already. What I want to talk about is tracking, because obviously, if you want to make sure you're actually properly analyzing the material, with proper standards, then you should know what the teams are actually saying. So the first thing is that you should be carefully tracking each person's speeches. So note taking doesn't have to be done on paper if you don't want that. You can do it digitally. So this all depends on your preference. I recommend experimenting on both so you can really truly decide which tracking method you like more. The second is that judges are actively tracking. So this means you're not just making a transcription of the round, i.e., you're not just typing things word for word and like trying to make sure you get all of the sentences from the 7 minute and 15-second speech correct. You are just trying to take note of what you think is going to be important while also evaluating the arguments as the round goes on. So that's why we called it active, because as the round is going on, you should already be thinking about, oh, how well do you think this argument actually fits into the standards that Bianca mentions, or how well should this contribution weigh against the contributions that's mentioned by the previous speaker already. So these are things that you should already be thinking about as the round goes on. And by taking note of what's important, we mean things like, it doesn't have to be arguments. It can be the setup, framing, responses, just anything that you think is going to be important in making the decision at the end of the round. The last thing to note here is that note taking is personal. So you should create a system that best works for you. So judging is not something that there's not a one size fits all system. You have to decide which note taking style do I like the most, which judging framework do I like the most. So I put some examples here. You can, for instance, try to highlight important arguments maybe in yellow or maybe in red, just so you can remember those things later on as you deliberate or as you try to make your decision later on. You can also be putting, like, for example, personal questions, i.e., let's say a speaker says a specific argument and you're not really sure what it means, or you don't think it's that well built. So you can just type in your notes and then highlight in bold, like, I don't think this is well built, or I'm not sure if this is a mechanized argument. After all, that note taking is just something for you anyway. Like, it's not going to be accessible to anyone else. So feel free to put your own personal notes that can help you later on. Yeah.
So, besides a lot of these expectations and responsibilities of what judges should do, I think the most important expectation that comes out of being a judge is that judges decide the fate of the debaters by controlling whether they win or lose a round. And this is important in out rounds, but this is especially important in any round that you are going to judge in a tournament or even in training. So make sure that when you're judging your rounds, you do so with a clear head. And at the end of the day, it is your decision that ultimately affects the debaters. So it is a heavy responsibility, but it's just something that naturally comes as a result of you being a judge, and that's your, role within the sport.
Yeah. Okay, next. Let's now talk about the journey to improvement. So you're probably going to start off, you're like, how do I start judging, right? Maybe you know that you have to make a decision, but you're not really sure about what the standards are, what you're going to do. Maybe you start reading like the world's judge manual, and then you start to figure out the standards. And then at this point, you might start to hit a plateau. So you're going to feel like you're not actually getting better. You're doing OAs every single day. You're watching so many judge lectures, but you don't think that improvement is happening. This is a canon event for judges. It really is going to take a while for you to learn how to properly integrate your judge framework into your style, making sure you're taking proper notes or making sure that your justifications are really holistic. So it's okay if at the start maybe you think you're sometimes stepping in, or sometimes you don't think your OAs are as good. This is really a part of the development as a judge. At that point, though, as you start to feel like you're plateauing, maybe you're going to receive like a lot of feedback from debaters, or maybe you're going to reflect a lot about what you think is your strengths and weaknesses as a judge. And at that point, you're going to start to improve again. And then you reach this point where you're like, oh, I've definitely improved now. I think I'm a pretty decent judge. I'm starting to break in tournaments. At this point, and this is like one of the roughest moments as a judge, you're going to go really, really down. As in, you're going to start to feel like you're regressing, in the sense that you will start to think that you're not giving OAs that are as good anymore, or the justifications that you once thought were clear, like maybe a few months ago, are not as clear anymore. This is really okay. And if you were a debater, for instance, prior to judging, you've probably also felt this feeling already. I recommend that you don't give up, because again, it's also part of a canon event, because like debate trends change, judging trends change, standards can also change, and what debaters want to hear from your oral adjudication will change. So if you feel like you've regressed, it's not necessarily that you're a bad judge or that you should quit judging. It's just a part of your development journey. And then after you feel like you're regressing, but you're still pushing on, that's when you're going to start to think that you're a good judge, and you're just going to keep hopefully going up, and you're going to start to realize that there's so much more for you to learn. Yeah.
Definitely, I agree with a lot of what Nikki says. Just an important thing to note is that your personal journey to improving as a judge is different for every person out there. So don't ever try to compare yourself to other judges, maybe within your insti, or maybe to other judges within the circuit who have progressed at different rates compared to you, because everybody has a different step to improvement. Maybe there are individuals who took like a year to break, or especially year to break consistently as a judge, whereas others took a lot faster to break consistently as a judge. These things do not necessarily denote your value within the sport. Rather, these are just things that naturally come differently to a lot of individuals. And most importantly, as well, your journey in improving as a judge does not come linearly. So, this is just an example of what your improvement can be like as a judge, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to follow in all of these stages, or it's going to consistently follow, a period of growth and then hitting a plateau and then feeling like you've definitely improved at that point. A lot of the times, these stages or these phases that you see within this diagram can happen in different parts of your journey as you continuously develop and learn new things about how to, develop better OAs, have clearer justifications, and you also receive different kinds of feedback from other debaters as well.
Yeah. I think what's really important, guys, is if you deliver a bad OA, or if you think in a specific round you don't have good justifications, that's not the end of your journey. Like Bianca mentioned, like we all develop in different ways. And your performance in one specific round or one specific tournament does not define your skills as a judge. So you guys should keep going. Okay.
So I think after we've already discussed what example of, like, a journey as to developing as a judge, we can talk about our own personal journeys into judging and what our experiences are. So I think everyone obviously has different experiences, but my personal experience is that when I entered the debate circuit, I entered without any prior debate experience, or at least very minimal debate experience. So as a result, when I tried out and I was, trying out for contingent, I was put as a developmental judge. So obviously, in order for me to develop, I tried to join as many tournaments as possible so I could train and get better. So it was kind of a trial by fire moment. I didn't really have like a set framework of how to develop, like how to get from a point of you sort of know how to debate, and then suddenly you have to transfer a lot of these skills into judging and having to, make an OA when you've only ever really listened to an OA, but you don't know the process of how to translate your note taking into that oral adjudication. So I felt like joining as many tournaments was the best way for me to learn. Obviously, I don't think that can be recommended for everybody, but that was just my personal way of trying to improve. So a lot of these rounds as well, and especially in personal training, so that's training amongst our instimates, became testing grounds for new OA formats and note-taking techniques. I found that the best way to experiment was not actually in tournaments, because these affect things like your ability, to break, judge out rounds, but training amongst, your fellow debate partners or like your instimates are a great ways to test new formats or new note-taking techniques. Maybe you want to try paper tracking instead of laptop tracking, for instance. I
Yeah.
also grew to like the analytical nature of judging. It allowed me to appreciate speeches in a way that isn't like usually afforded to debaters due to the competitive nature of the sport. It's difficult to really think of the fact that an argument is so amazing, because your first instinct as a debater is to dismantle that argument
You're
and
wrong.
think of, yeah, yeah, like you want to think of all of the reasons why it's bad first, especially if you're a naturally responsive speaker. So judging also allowed me then to hone my skills as a debater by learning from other debaters as well. So judging allows you to get into rooms, especially if you started out as a beginner debater, to like higher rooms or more well-skilled rooms than you initially thought you would. And this is where I think if you plan to transition into debating after being a developmental judge, this is where you can really learn from other more skilled debaters than you of how to construct your arguments, what responses do judges buy the most, what mechanisms do people usually use, and which are the things that really win around and make a 75 speech go to an 80 speech. These are the things that I think uh, are really advantageous to see, especially when you're judging. and it might not necessarily be as accessible to you when you started out in debate, because obviously maybe you're put in lower rooms, and that's natural. That's kind of part of becoming a beginner debater. But being a judge definitely allows you to access higher rooms, especially as you develop your skills.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think my journey is a little bit different from Bianca. So if Bianca entered the circuit without prior experience, mine was I was entering judging with already like 2 to 3 years of debate experience. And that's why I used to hate judging. I tried out as a debater, but the coaches decided to put me as a judge because they thought I could develop there. So because I was forced to judge, I thought there wasn't anything I could gain from it because I thought that, like, judging was really not something I wanted to pursue anyway. So what I would do, which hopefully you guys won't do, is I would skip training. I would refuse to attend training because I hated having to explain my decisions, and I didn't find the process of judging entertaining for me. But eventually, I started to shift my mindset and my perspective, which is also why in this lecture, the first thing we talked about was mindset. So I really tried entering it with a new mindset of, instead of thinking of all of the things I hated about judging or all of the ways that it was different from debating, I thought about the things that I actually could enjoy from judging. So as I started doing more OAs or started doing more panel deliberations, that's when I started to enjoy things like knowing that in the middle of my oral adjudication, I would give like a good justification. And then I would see like the debaters in front of me nod their heads or agree like silently with my justification. That was a really good feeling. Or for instance, during panel deliberations, when I'm able to catch like a contradiction or a specific response or material from a speaker that other judges didn't notice, and then they flip their decision because of me, or they start to rethink their decision because of me. I think these were like things that I really enjoyed about judging. And that's when I started to think that, okay, maybe judging really is different from debating. I don't get to prep, I don't get to fight against the debaters, but there are still things like the deliberations and the process of giving my justifications that are also things that could be enjoyable. Obviously, as you go on your own judge journeys, maybe you find things that you also will like that are different from mine. I think those are good also. What I also realized is that the initial difficulties in debating were similar to the initial difficulties in judging. So, part of the reason why I used to hate judging also is because I would give really bad oral adjudications at the start. And I was training with my institution, they would give me a low score. They would say, if this was a tournament, I would rate your oral adjudication like a 4 or a 5. Or with the feedback to my OAs, there was like a long list of comments and things to work on. And I hated that feeling of being bad. I hated that feeling of I've been debating for so long and I have to start over again. But I've changed my perspective again, and I've really seen that there's satisfaction in growing, in developing, and also, as Bianca's also mentioned, in being able to transfer that to debate as well. Because when I eventually went back to debating, I really recognized how much judging helped me in seeing other good debaters and how they debated, or seeing how judges actually evaluated arguments and how I could change the way I speak so that judges can better track mine arguments. So I think there's really a lot of things that you could get from both me and Bianca's journeys about how you can shift your perspective and really change your mindset to find things that you like about judging. Yeah. Okay.
So I think with that, we can now move on to some tangible tips for improvement. So these can include things like resources, regimens, as well as how to best maximize the training schedule or the type of in-seat training that you currently already have. So first, regarding resources.
Okay. So the first resource I'll talk about is the Worlds and the UADC Debate and Judge Manual. So I know everybody probably knows about the existence of these manuals, but I think a lot of people underestimate how vital reading these manuals are. They just think, oh, that's a rule book, but I don't need to check it because I already understand the basic rules of debate, I think you should still read it regardless, even if you're like already someone with a lot of experience in debate and you're going into judging. This is because these manuals not only help you fully understand the technical rules, so there's a lot of things like, for example, how judges should be able to assess contradictions or what counts as a counterfactual. These are things that maybe you aren't that familiar with if you are coming from debating. So I really recommend that you read these parts and all of the other parts of the manual. But aside from these manuals helping you understand the technical rules, I think they also help you be aware of the burdens of each motion type. So the manual really goes over the this house would, this house believes that, this house prefers, and then it discusses how the debaters should be debating each of these motions and what the burdens are of each of these motions. I think this is really important. I think there are a lot of rounds where debaters mistaken the burden, like they in a this house regrets motion, for instance, as gov. Maybe they forget to provide a counterfactual, or maybe they forget to give like some form of retrospective or even future analysis. These are already things you can use when you're assessing the debate or assessing who should be winning the round. So read everything, but you can feel free to highlight the important parts that you can go back to. Maybe you can take notes, maybe you can put it in your own debate notebook so that you can remember in these instances when there's a contradiction or when they don't provide a counterfactual, how should I be assessing the round now? Yeah.
Other than the judge manuals, there are also a lot of resources available on YouTube. So if you are coming from debate or you probably didn't have any debate experience before this, you probably searched up debate lectures on YouTube. The same as goes for judging. So I highly recommend watching lectures as well as reading the manual so you have a good starting point and a good theoretical foundation of what you are supposed to do as a judge and what it means as well to be a good judge. If you are like watching lectures, there are also videos on how to on like breaking down the judge manuals and what specific parts of the manual mean. Because I understand that especially if it's your first time reading it, there are some parts that can be difficult. There's also a lot of things like judge briefings and judge briefers that are available from previous tournaments that are also uploaded on YouTube, which have like a concise breakdown of what the standards are and what the like details are within the judge manual. I think these are also incredibly helpful and useful, especially if this is your first time judging. A lot of them tend to break down a lot of these components into different, step-by-step processes, such as note-taking and tracking, the standards and the framework that you have for judging. If this is BP judging, so AP is a different format. Obviously, you deliberate on your own. But in BP judging, usually they give tips and like a framework on how to handle panel discussions, whether you're a chair or, for example, you are the panel, answering to your chair, as well as how to deliver an OA and common mistakes. So usually, you can find a lot of these on different debater YouTube channels, but also majors themselves. So like the international majors like Worlds, UADC, they usually have judge lectures or their own judge workshops, which is talked about in the next section, that you can, view and watch in your own time. I definitely think these are an essential part of your, judge journey to learn from other judges who have more knowledge and more skill than you, especially so you can understand and, expand your knowledge about how judging works.
Yeah. The next part is attending judge workshops, as already mentioned by Bianca, and then watching OAs online. So occasionally, judge workshops can be found online. For instance, if maybe you don't like watching lectures or if you want to ask live questions, then there are judge workshops that can be found via social media platforms like Facebook. And these are usually hosted by well-known judges in the circuit who already have a lot of achievements, already have developed their personal style for judging. So I think if you follow like majors or if for instance you're friends with a lot of like well-known judges, they are going to randomly post that hey, we're hosting a workshop at this specific time, and then you can just register for those workshops so that you can ask your questions and then you get even more information about how you should do as a judge. I think participating in workshops allows you to hone in on specific skills, for instance, i.e. tracking, and then as mentioned already, it also allows you the opportunity to obtain real-time feedback. So sometimes in these workshops are going to have exercises like they're going to give some gov arguments and then some opposition arguments, and then maybe they'll call you on and ask you what's your decision, and then how would you justify that decision. So I think it might be a little bit scary, but again, I think the entire process of judging is already scary. So really, maximizing these opportunities is good for you to become better as a judge. Aside from judge workshops, there are already oral adjudications available online. So these are also seen on YouTube. So you can see how many like how judges navigate like many different scenarios. So for instance, if there's a split in the panel, how do they discuss that split? Or for instance, if it's a close round, how do they assess like the different material that's provided by the various judges? So I think if you just search like debate round with OA, you'll find a lot. So those are also helpful if you want to see like how does my OA compare with the OAs of well-known judges in the circuit. Yeah.
Next is how do you utilize those resources effectively? And the best way to do this is to set a regimen or training routine that you should follow. So before that, you should identify the goals that you want to set. So these goals ensure that you have a sense of direction in your development as a judge, especially if you are entering this with someone who is not very familiar with judging and you're like, I don't really know what I want to do as a judge. Maybe the only thing I really want to do is just break consistently in the tournament. It's good to sit down and identify at least one to two specific, actionable, and quantifiable goals. There's a lot of goal setting frameworks on the internet. You can search them up. I think SMART is one of the most popular ones, but an example of a specific and quantifiable and actionable goal that you can have is, for example, I want to break in all three of my pre-majors and rank as the top 10th judge in a major. So these are specific goals. So you want to break in a certain number of tournaments. And these are also quantifiable. So for example, ranking as the 10th best judge in a major is a quantifiable goal that you can have. I think another example of a quantifiable goal is perhaps having a like an average score of 8 or 7 in all of your OAs within a tournament. It's really good to have specific goals because these are checkpoints that you can have in terms of your progress. Once you've determined your goals as well, you should be able to do things like identify your strengths and weaknesses. So be honest with yourself about what you consider your strengths and what you consider your weaknesses. Maybe you think I'm really good at tracking a debate, but I have difficulty in having really concise recap because I have a tendency to recap too much of what was going on in the debate. So this will narrow down what you need to work on in your regimen, especially because you don't have like a lot of hours within a day. You don't have a lot of hours within a week. And the average run up to a majors is only around 2 to 3 months at most. So you really need to maximize the amount of time that you have to prepare. And I think the best way to do that is to have goals and things that you clearly know that you need to work on, especially as a judge.
Yeah. So once you've identified your goals, this is again the first step. That's when you can now create a routine. So consistency and discipline really is the only ways to get better. So you should be allotting time within a week to train specific skills with regards to the goals that you have identified. So you can feel free to adjust your routine based on your personal experiences as you continue judging. So for instance, let's say you've accomplished your goal already of getting an average judge score of 7, or maybe you've really broken in all three of your pre-majors already. You can then adjust your goals, find new goals, and then adjust your routine based on those goals. So it's really your goal is the thing that will guide how you're going to be training and what you want to be doing. So even the activities that you choose to do within your specific routine can be personalized. So for instance, here are just some examples of the activities I did when I was training as a judge. So I was trying to write an OA with no time limit because oftentimes I think a lot of worries from like people who are starting out in judging is they think, oh, like the 10 minutes or the 15 minutes given for deliberation, especially in Asian Parliamentary, for instance, is not enough for me to give a good oral adjudication. I think it's also good if you try writing an oral adjudication with no time limit and then seeing is the justifications actually clear already? Like, are my justifications things that the debaters would like to hear, or is there still something that's missing? Because if there are things that are missing, then that means it's not a time issue problem, and maybe it's still another problem, like your framework is still not properly adjusted, or you haven't integrated your framework properly into your standards yet. Yeah. Another example of an activity is perhaps saying your justifications in 30 seconds. This is really important, especially as a panel or a trainee. If you have, let's say you're a panel, like a five-person panel, and you have very little time to impress your chair, I think practicing being brief and concise, but also very clear in your justifications can be helpful. And then the last example of an activity is just trying to fit your notes only in one piece of paper. So a common problem I hear from judges that are starting out is that they take way too many notes, to the point where they're not able to actively track, i.e., they're not actually thinking about the arguments, they're not assessing it during the round. So an activity I tried also is I will be only given one piece of yellow pad paper, and I need to fit all of my notes for all eight speakers into that one piece of paper. And I think it will really help you try to be more concise with what you write, and how you're going to be tracking at the end of the day. These are just some examples of activities. Again, you can adjust them based on your problems. These are just what I did based on my problems of like talking too long, or like tracking too much, or just not having clear standards. The last thing is just try to set like a minimum baseline of what you want to accomplish in a week to avoid getting overwhelmed. Obviously, all of us want to be on the grind. We want to achieve our goals of like ranking as the top 10 judge, or, getting an average judge score of 7 or 8. But burnout still exists. We are still human. So make sure that you have a regime that also takes into consideration resting and preventing burnout from happening, especially with like other things that you may be considering, like your academics or other hobbies that you may have.
So this is a sample regimen. This sample regimen was created with the assumption that you are part of a debate society who also has institutional training, so you are training with your NC mates. So you can follow this regimen, you can adjust it based on your own personal preferences. Definitely, this might not be the only things that you will do per day when you're training as a judge, but it's just good to establish a minimum baseline. So, for example, on Monday, I will watch a round and I will give and record an OA. So I highly recommend watching rounds from YouTube and then tracking them and then giving an OA. So this is the best way I think to practice what it's like to give an oral adjudication, especially if you've never given one before and maybe you're too nervous to initially start out giving oral adjudications to a group of debaters, even if they may be your fellow NC mates. I also highly recommend experimenting with the different types of rounds that you're watching. So, for example, if you have a hard time tracking rounds about economics or rounds about IR, especially if you've also struggled with those themes as a debater, you should prioritize watching rounds about economics and about IR because your ability to understand them or, process certain information will be different from rounds that you are about, subjects that you are more familiar with. On Tuesday, then you might want to judge a spar. So these can be spars with other insties. These can be spars amongst your own teammates. And I think judging a spar is great because it exposes you to a lot of different debating styles that you might not necessarily be familiar with. And it's also a great way to test out live feedback. Then on Wednesday, you can listen to the OA and you can also take notes. So initially, I think when you're at that point in your judge journey, you feel a little bit embarrassed when listening to your old OAs. You're like, why did I sound like that? Why does my justification sound so unclear? But honestly, the best way to improve is to listen to how you yourself sound and to take notes about the things that you can improve on. So you can also just redo your OA, re-record it based on your own personal feedback, or send it to other people, get feedback from them, and then redo your OA. So on Thursday, you can have like your Insti training. So this is where you're probably like doing around with a lot of your Insti mates, and this is where you can also like test out new formats, new frameworks, anything that you new that you want to introduce. You can test it out there. Then on Friday, you can, watch a judge lecture on YouTube. There's a lot available, like we've talked about. And then on Saturday and Sunday, those are usually tournament days for a lot of people. So you can finally test out all of your judge learnings by attending a tournament for real, get feedback from debaters, experience judging out rounds when you break. Those are really exciting stuff. And it's just a example of a sample regimen that you can have.
Yes. Okay. Let's now talk about maximizing insti training. Again, this is with the assumption that you have a debate institution that you train with, but if you don't, it's also okay. I think all of the things that Bianca and I have talked about, like joining judge workshops, watching an watching a round and then giving an OA and then re-listening to that, those are also ways to improve individually. So how do you maximize institutional training? Firstly, you should be setting a goal for each session. Again, you're always thinking about goals so that you know what you're working towards. So do you want to work on listening? Do you want to work on time management? Do you want to work on note taking, etc. The second is, don't be afraid to ask feedback from your instimates. So ask specific questions. So I think a lot of times judges tend to just ask, what did you think about my OA? But I think we can go more specific, right? Like, what did you think about the way I dealt with this specific argument? Or did you think I resolved this deadlock that happened in this debate well? Just so that it's clear what you want comments on. Because oftentimes, if you just ask, what did you think about my OA? They might have a hard time giving you specific comments. They might just be like, it was an okay OA. And then they don't know how to give further suggestions after that. The next is that if there are judges in your institution, like fellow judges, you can ask them how they judge so that you can incorporate some things, i.e., how do you note take? What are the standards that you use in judging? So that you can just, like, you don't have to copy paste, obviously, because again, as mentioned, like, judging is something that's very personal, but maybe there are specific aspects from their judging that you like, and maybe you want to incorporate that, or you want to personalize it in your own style of judging. And then the last thing is just, experimenting as much as possible. You can try out different OA formats. You can try out different note taking styles. Maybe you don't want to do paper anymore. Maybe you want to try on Docs, or maybe you even want to try on Google Sheets. You can try out, like, yeah, like, just experimenting on different things, even if it's small changes to your OA. I think you should always try that with other people, just so that those other people can give you comments on what they think. Yeah. Bianca, do you have anything you want to add?
Yes, actually, I think another thing is record keeping. So you should record your OAs as much as possible. This is not something that admittedly I've been like as diligent with following, but I definitely encourage it more, especially if you're new to judging, or maybe you're already pretty familiar with judging and you want to see how you're progressing. I really think that recording your OAs and seeing like the progression of how you've improved is not only just a great way to motivate you, but it's a good way to understand how you formulate thoughts, because I think it's different when you're speaking versus when you're looking back and you realize, oh wow, I take a really long time to resolve a specific clash between these teams. Or for example, I don't think my justification regarding this specific issue was as concise enough, or was like well spoken enough, or for well explained enough, for example. And these are only things that I think you are able to identify, and you are able to develop that sense of when you're doing things right or wrong. If you take the time to record your OAs and occasionally listen to yourself.
Okay, that's it for our lecture. Thank you so much for watching this video. We hope you enjoy the rest of the lectures as well.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Are you sure you want to stop